Imagine this. Just over 100 years ago, November 4th, 1922, Egypt, Valley of the Kings. The air's thick with dust, anticipation, and archaeologist Howard Carter makes this tiny hole in a sealed door.
Yeah.
Lights a candle, peers into the darkness. Darkness sealed for, 3,000 years? Someone asks, "Can you see anything?"
And he says,
Yes, wonderful things. Those famous words.
it really is an iconic moment, isn't it? That first glimpse into King Tutankhamun's tomb, almost untouched.
Astonishing. It changed so much about how we saw ancient Egypt.
Absolutely.
And for this deep dive, we've gathered some really fascinating sources for you. We've got an article listing 30 incredible treasures from the tomb, historical accounts of that whole radical Amarna period, his father's time, plus Egyptian burial practices.
And even some cutting-edge science, right? About Tut's health, his
That's
family.
exactly. So our mission today is to unpack these wonderful things, but also go way beyond the gold.
Right, into the death, the legacy of the boy king himself.
We'll look at his world, his, frankly, challenging personal story, and even how myths, like the famous mummy's curse, still kind of shape how we see history today.
It's your shortcut, really, to getting properly informed about one of history's most iconic figures.
So let's start with that myth, the curse. Because when Carter announced the discovery,
Oh, the press went absolutely wild. Worldwide sensation instantly.
and almost immediately these stories started bubbling up, a curse on anyone disturbing the pharaoh.
It's amazing how fast it caught on. Even before anything cursed actually happened, there was this popular novelist, Marie Corelli.
Right, I read about her.
She immediately speculated in the papers about dire punishment for any, quote, rash intruder. Like people wanted there to be a curse.
And then boom, Lord Carnarvon, the guy funding the whole thing, dies in Cairo. Not long after the opening, age 56. And right after he died, apparently the city's lights went out.
Wow. Okay, you can see how that would fuel things.
Yeah.
Massive.
Even Arthur Conan Doyle, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, chimed in, suggested some kind of evil elemental spirit was responsible.
It's just fascinating how a series of, probably coincidental tragic events could build such a powerful myth.
Because there wasn't actually a curse written in the tomb, was there?
No, not at all. No inscribed curse was found. But then other deaths happened. People connected, however loosely, to the tomb, especially if they died violently or in strange ways. They just got woven into this narrative, made it seem real.
And the list kept growing. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, shot in 23. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died mysteriously in 24. Sir Lee Stack, assassinated in Cairo, also 24.
It just kept feeding the story. Arthur Mace from Carter's team supposedly died of arsenic poisoning in 28.
Then Carter's secretary, Richard Bethel, smothered in 29. And his father committed suicide in 30. I mean, it sounds pretty suspicious when you listen like that.
It does, but you have to look at the context and, the probabilities. It shows how strong a narrative can be, though.
Even when the facts don't quite line up, Howard Carter himself called it pommy rot. Total nonsense.
Right, but even when he died, years later in 1939, age 64 from Hodgkin's disease.
They brought up the curse again.
Oh yeah, in his obituaries. The story just persisted. And it raises a really important question for you, the listener. How much of history, as we perceive it, is shaped by these kinds of stories, by myth, rather than just the facts?
Because most people involved lived long lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Most people who worked there or visited lived perfectly normal, long lives. But that didn't seem to matter to those who wanted to believe in the curse.
It's a powerful story. Okay, so beyond the curse and the media hype, let's get to the actual wonderful things, the artifacts Carter found.
The sheer volume, the diversity, it's just incredible. And yes, there's gold, lots of gold, but so much more.
The most famous thing has to be the death mask, right?
Undoubtedly. It's stunning. 21 inches long, weighs 22 pounds, mostly gold, inlaid with semi-precious stones, colored glass.
And those eyes. Obsidian and quartz.
Yes. And the beard, the headdress with the cobra and vulture symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt. But the crucial part, for the Egyptians anyway, was the back.
What was on the back?
A spell. Hieroglyphs from the Book of the Dead. It guaranteed the mask's ability to function as the face of the deceased. It wasn't just art, it was functional magic.
Functional magic, I like that. So it had a job to do in the afterlife.
Precisely. And that idea runs through so many of the items. Even some surprising personal things like a mannequin.
A mannequin, like in a shop.
Sort of. A garment mannequin. Used to help choose, adjust, store the king's clothes and jewelry. Tut was apparently quite the snappy dresser.
Had a huge wardrobe, I read. Robes, sandals, underwear, even his baby clothes.
Yep, hundreds of garments, 12 lavish robes, dozens of sandals, socks. It shows this incredible attention to detail, ensuring he was perfectly outfitted for eternity.
Priorities. Wardrobe sorted for the afterlife. And he liked games, too.
He did. They found at least 4 board games. Senate, the game of 20. We don't know the exact rules for either, but Senate involved moving pieces off the board, trying to block your opponent.
Imagine playing Senate in the Field of Reeds. And golden sandals, found on the mummy.
Yeah, about 29.5 centimeters long. But experts think he probably wouldn't have worn those specific ones in life.
Ah, so made just for the burial.
Seems likely. Another object purely for the afterlife journey.
Okay, let's talk power symbols. The coffins. 3 of them, nested.
3 coffins, yes, one inside the other, and heavy combined weight, about 1.25 tons.
Wow. Must have been tough for Carter to handle in that small tomb.
Extremely challenging. The outer one was gilded wood. The second also gilded wood decorated with lotus flowers. But the innermost,
Solid gold,
wrapped in linen, and all 3 depicted Tut with a long beard, holding the crook and flail, the symbols of kingship.
Amazing. And the golden throne, that picture is everywhere. Tut and his wife, Akhenaten.
Yes, and Akhenaten. She seems to be putting ointment or perfume on him. It's actually a wooden chair, but covered in gold and silver foil, inlaid with stones.
Beautiful. And you mentioned chairs were a luxury item back then, a sign of power.
Absolutely. Most Egyptians would squat or sit on low stools. A chair like this screamed wealth and status.
And chariots. 6 of them.
6 chariots, yeah. Some were elaborate state chariots. One had a canopy, images of foreign captives on the side.
Propaganda on wheels.
Pretty much. And inscriptions linking them to Tut and Akhenaten and the god Horus. Symbols of royal power and divine protection.
Even trumpets, right. Silver and bronze.
2 trumpets, yes. Among the oldest working ones, well, surviving ones in the world. Someone actually played them for a BBC broadcast in 1939.
No way.
Yeah, though using a modern mouthpiece, they're far too fragile now, obviously.
Incredible. And then there were objects specifically for the afterlife itself. Shabtai dolls.
Right, hundreds of them. Little figurines, often holding a crook and flail too. Their job was to magically come alive and do any manual labor required of the king in the afterlife.
So you could just chill while your dolls did the farming.
That was the idea. The more shabtis you had, the wealthier you were. Pharaoh's ones could be made of precious materials.
And the canopic jars, those held the organs, right?
Exactly. The liver, lungs, stomach, intestines removed during mummification, but preserved because they were thought to be needed later.
Everything points to this incredibly detailed belief about the next life.
It does. And the art reinforces it. A colorful breastplate with a scarab beetle amulet symbol of rebirth. A statue of Anubis, the jackal god of mummification.
Wall paintings, too. Tut with Osiris.
Yes, Tut with Osiris, lord of the underworld.
Gross.
Flanked by Anubis and Hathor, the goddess of fertility and love. Even a cup, shaped like a lotus flower, had hieroglyphs asking for Tut to have millions of years of life.
It's just a complete worldview laid out in that tomb. Okay, so we've seen the treasures, the myths, the beliefs. Let's get personal. King Tut's actual story, because it's surprisingly short and difficult.
Very short. Born around 1341 BC, died 1323 BC. So yeah, only 18 or 19 years old.
And recent science on his mummy paints a pretty grim picture of his health.
He really does. He limped, had tender bones, a clubbed foot. He was quite slightly built, maybe 5'6", had an overbite and a cleft palate.
A cleft palate, that would have caused issues.
Oh, definitely. Problems feeding, possibly speaking clearly, probably recurrent ear infections, hearing issues, dental problems. He also had mild scoliosis, a curved spine.
And the foot thing sounds particularly bad. One flat, one club with bone necrosis.
Yeah, necrosis means the bone tissue is dying from lack of blood supply. Would have caused significant pain, swelling. He almost certainly walked with a limp and needed a cane.
Which explains why they found so many canes in the tomb.
Exactly. And on top of that, he had malaria.
Yeah.
Repeatedly, the most severe strains. Plus, he fell and fractured his leg badly at some point before he died. And it seems it got infected and never properly healed. And possibly sickle cell anemia.
Good grief. He really, as the source said, didn't win the genetic lottery.
He certainly didn't. And a lot of this, maybe all of it, could well be down to inheriting bad genes due to generations of inbreeding in the royal family.
Right, because they practiced that a lot. Brother-sister marriage, uncle-niece.
Extensively, to keep the bloodline pure and consolidate power. Tut's own father, Akhenaten, was the result of a brother-sister union, and Tut himself married his half-sister, Akhenaten.
It's a recipe for genetic problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And his short, difficult life played out against this really dramatic backdrop, the Amarna period, started by his father.
Akhenaten, who wasn't originally called Akhenaten, right? He was Amenhotep IV.
That's right. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Eden, and he instigated this radical religious revolution.
Moving from Egypt's traditional gods, lots of gods,
Polytheism, yeah, to worshiping just one deity, the sun disk, Atening. It's considered the earliest confirmed example of something like monotheism.
and he suppressed the worship of the old gods. That must have caused trouble.
Big trouble, especially with the powerful priests of gods like Amun-Ra. He offended a lot of powerful people. He even moved the capital city to a new site, Akhenaten.
And the art changed dramatically too, didn't it? Those statues of Akhenaten look different.
Very different. Highly stylized, almost androgynous. Large thighs, slim torso, drooping belly, full lips, long neck and nose. It's exaggerated, almost grotesque compared to earlier, more idealized Egyptian art. A complete break with tradition.
So Tutankhamun takes over and he's only, what, 9 years old?
Around 9, yes. And pretty quickly, under guidance presumably, he reverses course. Restores the old gods, the Egyptian pantheon. Moves the government back to Memphis. Akhenaten fades in importance.
A return to the old ways.
Yes. But later pharaohs went even further. Horemheb, who came after Tut's immediate successor Ai, he ordered Akhenaten's city torn down. Systematically tried to erase the entire Amarna period from history. Called it an aberration.
Which might explain why Tut's tomb survived, because maybe people kind of forgot about him or where he was buried because of this historical scrubbing.
It's a very plausible theory. He was part of that heretical period, so perhaps his memory and tomb were deliberately neglected or suppressed, which ironically protected him.
Fascinating. And this Amarna age wasn't just internal drama, there was international stuff going on too, the Amarna letters.
Oh yes, a treasure trove.
Yeah.
Clay tablets, correspondence between Egypt and the other big powers of the time, Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni, the Hittites.
What were they writing about?
All sorts, diplomacy, trade, royal marriages. What's really interesting is this idea of brotherhood among the kings. They called each other brother.
Like a big royal family.
Kind of, like an enlarged village, as one scholar put it. They sent updates on their health, exchanged lavish gifts constantly. It was all about maintaining these personal relationships between rulers.
High-level networking.
You could say that. And then there's the Zananza affair. That's a wild story.
Okay, tell me.
After Tut died, his widow, Queen Dakamunzu, probably Ankhesenamun, wrote a desperate letter to the Hittite king, Suppiluliuma.
What does she want?
She said her husband died, she had no son, and she refused to marry one of her servants. She asked the Hittite king to send one of his sons to marry her and become king of Egypt.
Whoa, that's huge. Did he do it?
He was suspicious at first, but eventually sent his son, Prince Zananza. But
Oh no, what happened?
Zanza was murdered, probably on his way to Egypt, maybe by Egyptians who didn't want a foreign king.
And the Hittite king must have been furious.
Furious. It led to war between Egypt and the Hittites, and apparently Egyptian prisoners of war carried a plague back to the Hittite lands that devastated their empire, even killed King Suppiluliuma himself.
What a story. High stakes, ancient politics.
Absolutely.
So all this life, drama, politics, it all leads back to preparing for the afterlife, which for the Egyptians was everything. What was their vision of eternity?
They called it Aru, the field of reeds. It was imagined as a perfect reflection of the life you lived on Earth, but idealized. Everything you lost at death was waiting for you there.
Sounds nice. And the mourning rituals were pretty intense.
Extremely. Herodotus described women plastering their heads and faces with mud, walking through town, beating their bare breasts, wailing. Men did similar things.
Yeah.
Very public, very dramatic grief.
And it all revolved around preserving the body, right? Because of the soul.
Yes. They believed the soul had multiple parts, maybe 9. But the physical body was crucial. It needed to exist so that other parts, like the Ka, life force, and Ba, personality, could recognize it and reunite with it.
Which is why mummification was so incredibly important.
Vital. It wasn't just about preservation. It was a religious necessity. Embalmers offered different levels of service depending on price.
But the key ingredient was natron.
Natron, exactly. A natural salt mixture found in Egypt. It desiccates dries out the body and also helps remove fats.
So for the top-tier mummification,
They'd remove the brain, usually through the nostrils with hooks, make an incision in the flank to remove the abdominal organs, liver, lungs, stomach, intestines.
Right.
Then clean the cavity with palm wine and spices, fill it with temporary stuffing or substances like myrrh and cassia, and then cover the entire body in natron for 70 days.
70 days.
70 days. After that, they'd wash the body, anoint it, pack it properly, and wrap it meticulously in layers and layers of linen bandages, often with amulets tucked in, using resin or gum as an adhesive.
But they left the heart inside.
Yes, only the heart remained. They believed it contained the ab, the seat of intellect, emotion, memory, basically, the essence of the person. It was needed for the final judgment.
And the organs they took out went into those canopic jars we mentioned.
Correct. Preserved separately, each guarded by one of the 4 sons of Horus, because they were thought to be needed by the deceased in the afterlife.
It's incredibly complex, and they had guidebooks too, funerary texts.
Absolutely. Starting with the pyramid texts in the Old Kingdom, then the coffin texts, and finally the most famous one, the Book of the Dead.
Or the Book of Coming Forth by Day, right?
That's its actual Egyptian name. These weren't single books, but collections of spells and prayers. Their purpose was to guide the soul, remind them who they were, where they were going, how to navigate the dangers of the underworld, and pass the final judgment.
Like an afterlife instruction manual.
Exactly. And a crucial ritual was the opening of the mouth ceremony.
What did that involve?
It was performed on the mummy or a statue just before burial. A priest used special tools, like a ceremonial adze, to symbolically touch the mouth, eyes, nose, ears, arms, and legs.
To reanimate them.
To magically enable the deceased to breathe, eat, speak, see, hear, and move again in the afterlife, to make the body functional for the soul.
Incredible. And after the burial?
Often the mourners would have a feast right there beside the tomb, celebrating the person's life, but also marking the transition.
But the deceased still had one more hurdle, the judgment.
The big one. In the Hall of Truth, before the god Osiris, the deceased's heart, the ab, would be weighed on scales against the feather of Ma'at.
Ma'at representing truth, justice, cosmic order.
Precisely. Thoth, the god of wisdom, recorded the result. If the heart was lighter than or balanced with the feather, meaning the person had lived a just life.
They got into the field of reeds?
Yes, they achieved eternal life. But if the heart was heavy with sin, it was fed to the monster Amut, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo. And the soul was obliterated, ceased to exist.
No second chances.
None. Which is why living righteously and having the correct burial rituals, including the spells from the Book of the Dead, were so incredibly vital. Your eternity literally depended on it.
Wow. Okay, from ancient rituals, let's jump thousands of years forward to cutting-edge science, archaeogenetics, studying ancient DNA.
Yes, it's a field that's really exploding and giving us completely new insights into the past, including ancient Egypt, sometimes challenging old ideas.
And there's a very recent finding from 2025.
Well, reported in 2025, a whole genome study of an Old Kingdom Egyptian man, radiocarbon dated way back, 2855 to 2570 BC.
Old Kingdom. So pre-Tutankhamun by a long shot. What did they find in his genes?
They found his ancestry was about 80% related to North African Neolithic populations, which makes sense. But about 20% was sourced to the Eastern Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia region.
Mesopotamia. Modern Iraq area. That's interesting. What does that imply?
It provides direct genetic evidence for ancestry from that region in ancient Egypt, way back then. It suggests there were ancient migrations from the Eastern Fertile Crescent to Egypt, not just cultural influences like writing, which we already knew about.
So more movement, more mixing of populations than maybe we thought.
It points that way. And it fits with some earlier, more limited genetic studies that showed links between ancient Egyptians and modern Egyptians, but also affinities with Middle Eastern groups, especially from the Levant.
Like modern-day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon.
Exactly. And also connections to Nubians, south of Egypt. It paints a picture of Egypt as being part of this wider network of populations, interacting and moving over millennia, not totally isolated.
But it's still early days for this kind of research, right?
Definitely. It's an evolving field. Scholars rightly point out we need more samples from wider areas across different time periods to build a really robust picture. But it's fascinating how science is adding these new layers to our understanding. It shows how history isn't static. We're always learning more.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot. From those glittering, wonderful things to the really quite sad details of Tut's poor health. We've touched on his father's radical religious changes, the complex diplomacy of the Amarna age, much.
And those deep, profound beliefs about death and the afterlife that shaped everything they did. Mummification, the tombs, the texts.
It really shows how individual lives, even a king's short life, were tangled up with these huge historical shifts, and how one tomb, preserved by chance, can unlock so much.
From the power of myth, like the curse which still grabs people, to the hard science of DNA, revealing ancient connections across continents. Tut's story just keeps echoing.
So thinking about all this, the incredible effort the Egyptians put into ensuring eternal life, our own modern fascination with curses, with finding our origins in genetics, it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What parts of our own lives, our health, our beliefs, our connections do we hope will last? And what stories, what narratives do we build around them then and now to try and make sense of it all?